Hello there, people of the internet. I don't know the differences myself, so this is going to be kind of a learning curve for me. I got a German World War II production Kar98 on top, and I got a Yugoslavian M48 Mauser. This is, I believe, a full M48, not an A1 or any of the other variants, because this right here has milled everything. So, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of look through these two rifles and see what kind of differences there are between the two. I do know that they do have different length receivers, so none of the parts are interchangeable to my knowledge, or at least there might be a few parts for the bolt and whatnot that might be interchangeable. But for the most part, not a whole lot's going to be interchangeable between them, but there should be enough similarities for us to go ahead and have a look at the rifles and be like, okay, this is something I noticed, that's something I noticed, etc., etc. So right off the bat, the first thing I'm noticing, Kar98 has this cutout for your thumb, and the M48 does not. I'm also noticing the M48 has a flat side on the bolt handle. Kar98 does not. So that was probably done to give you that little bit of extra room so you can get your thumb under there and cycle the rifle. Versus this right here, I guess the Germans just decided it was easier to cut the wood, and the Yugoslavians decided it was easier to grind the metal. So I'm also noticing a difference with the upper handguard. Upper handguard right here goes to the rear of the rear sight, so that is another interesting piece. Looks like on this right here, let me set this down and I'll pick up this right here. On the Kar98, the handguard does not go to the end of the rear sight, we just have flat metal right there. Looks like the handguard is caught on the front of the rear sight. There's some sort of retaining system right there. So Kar98 also has an added wood piece. Well, I guess the Yugo M48 Mauser has the added wood piece. Right here on the top handguard of the Kar98, we have metal showing in between the nose cap, and I guess that would be the front barrel band. So if we look on the Yugoslavian Mauser, that section of rifle is covered with wood. So this right here is an H-piece or an H-style nose cap. I know that the Kar98 also had the same style of nose cap. This Kar98 right here is a kind of a simplified version. This was 1944 production, and Germany used a simpler style of nose cap. During that time period, that was just a logistical thing. So I do know that the Germans had different versions of Kar98. I'm kind of comparing it to this version. I'm doing it loosely, simply because, like I said, there are different versions of Kar98 out there. So, of course, the markings are going to be different. This is marked CE44, and we got the little eagle markings all over the place. Not going to have that on the Yugoslavian Mauser, because it is, of course, Yugoslavian. We have the M48 and crest right there. This crest is actually quite gosh darn good looking. So we actually have on the Yugo M48, we have the, what would you call that? The numbers on both sides of the elevation markings. That's the word I'm looking for. The elevation markings on both sides of the rear sight. That's something that you saw in earlier versions of Kar98 production. I don't think I have an earlier version of Kar98 here with me at this particular filming location. Yeah, but later on in the war, they got rid of that. There's no numbers on the underside of the rear sights on this particular Kar98, and that's just because it's a later version. I'm also noticing that this right here has very clearly an aluminum butt plate on it. That was probably pretty gosh darn common with Kar98s, especially as the war progressed. They might have had a steel one before. This one right here, this doesn't look like aluminum. As a matter of fact, it's kind of pitted. I don't see any rust or anything, but I'm fairly certain that this is steel. It might be just a darker aluminum, but it doesn't look like an aluminum. So I'm going to go with this as a different material than the aluminum butt plate. So besides all of that, we do have, I know on very later versions of Kar98 they didn't have it, but we do have retaining screws for the actual screws that the Mauser action mounts into on both versions of these rifles. So the M48 has it right here, and the Kar98 has it right there. Now, whether or not those are actually there, in this particular case on this Kar98, those are missing, there's really not that big of a problem. The retaining screws aren't mattering all that much. All right, now, if we take a look at the sling mounting system, this right here actually has a sling on it. The M48, although this is not like the appropriate sling for these rifles, the M48 and the Kar98 seem to have the exact same style of sling mounting system. Looks like on both barrel bands we have a milled barrel band, and we have the little mounting or sling mount right there on both of the barrel bands of these rifles. I know on other versions of Mausers they have different sling setups, but these are so gosh darn similar. Like, the only differences I'm seeing between these two rifles, and there are versions of the Kar98 that are more similar to the M48. I think the M48 is kind of modeled after earlier versions of the Kar98. We see that with the rear sights and whatnot. But I think that the only real significant differences between these two, I am noticing that the M48 doesn't have a disassembly notch on the stock. So no disassembly notch versus the Kar98, which does, and that is used to disassemble your bolt. You put your firing pin inside of your rifle right there, and this way you can push down on it, but not all your Kar98s had that. So I think the big differences that we're seeing here is well, the most noticeable one is probably the cutout in the wood right here. The M48 doesn't have that. The M48 has a ground bolt instead of a regular one with the cutout in the wood. The M48 has the early style of Mauser sight. M48, I mean, this is very clearly modeled after an early Mauser. The biggest difference that I'm noticing is probably going to be the upper handguard wood. The M48 has full handguard wood versus the Kar98, which is like half of an upper handguard. This M48 is supposed to have a front hood sight on it. You can see the little notches right there where it goes. I'm just missing this particular one on this particular model. So other than the wood and the little cutout right there for, well, other than the wood on the upper handguard and the wood for the little cutout, there's really not that much of a difference. There are some slight length differences with the bolt. Like I said, bolts are not interchangeable. But besides that, these are basically the same exact rifle. You might have some difficulties disassembling the M48 simply because the Kar98 does have the disassembly disc. Perhaps this butt plate is from some sort of system that had, like some sort of Mauser that had that disassembly disc. Because maybe the M48 was supposed to have that little hole drilled out on the butt plate, and this right here just doesn't have that. If I get under the wood, I might find a little hole inside the wood. This way you can push your firing pin into that and disassemble your bolt in the event that you need to. I got no idea on that one, though. That's just speculation on my part. So, extraordinarily similar rifles, unless we're talking about price point. I've seen these rifles go for like $1,200 plus. Especially nowadays in 2024, hell, we're gonna mark that up to like $1,500 plus. Absolutely insane what these are selling for. World War II production Kar98s versus the M48. I think I picked this one up like a month ago for about $200 or so. So maybe after taxes and whatnot, it came out to $250. So huge difference in price point, but the rifles themselves are so overwhelmingly dramatically similar. I just wanted to stick them side by side to see the differences between the two. I do see on our trigger guard right here on the Mauser, we have a little hole. Not quite sure what that's for, versus the M48, which does not have that little hole. All right, well, that is kind of my overview of these two rifles. I don't have much else to add. Looks like everything else is pretty much right on point. It looks like for the Yugo Mauser, the upper handguard is being retained by this little screw because they don't have the Kar98's mounting system for the upper handguard simply because it's a different style of handguard. Looks like the Kar98 upper handguard just kind of pushes back into a recess that's right in front of the rear sight. Can't do that with a full-length handguard. Anyway, folks, that's pretty much all I have to say on the subject. Thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.